Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar at Statistics Solutions. My name is Justin D'Souza. I'm a quantitative specialist at the company. During today's webinar, we are going to discuss preparations for a quantitative defense. A lot of the advice I'll give will apply to qualitative studies as well. We'll look at some examples and discuss how to organize the PowerPoint for a defense. We'll send everyone a copy of the webinar as well as a copy of the PowerPoint. And at the end of the webinar, we'll do a question and answer session. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box or the Q&A box. All right, let's get started. But first, I'll give a brief overview on the services we provide at our company, Statistics Solutions. Then we'll look at defense preparation and review some examples. We'll conclude with a summary and a Q&A session. So on this slide, you can see all the various parts of the dissertation journey that we assist with. We have methodologists at our company, quantitative and qualitative, and we have literature review specialists. So starting with topic development, going all the way to final defense and journal publications, we can assist with virtually any part of the dissertation. So if you need help framing your research questions, identifying a purpose and problem statement, pinpointing a theoretical framework, figuring out what are the best statistical analyses to run to address your research questions, we can assist with all of these things. Just let us know. If you have any questions, you can give us a call at 727-442-4290 for a free consultation. And on this slide, you can view the past webinars that we have done, as well as the future webinars that we will be doing. Right, so we are discussing the defense, and it's important first to lay the foundation. What is the difference between a proposal and a final defense? So most colleges and universities will do both a proposal and a final defense, but some will only do a final defense. So it's important to know the structure at your university. The proposal defense involves your introduction, your literature review, and the methodology. So during this defense, it's important to summarize the key points from those three chapters. The primary focus needs to be justifying why the study needs to be conducted. What is the gap in the literature? What are you contributing that nobody has done before? And then you need to explain the methodology for the proposed study. That's usually the biggest part of the proposal defense, is explaining your methodology and justifying the decisions that you're making. The final defense includes the introduction, lit review, and methodology. However, you have to condense those chapters because you need to leave room for your results, the discussion. So during the final defense, the study has already been conducted. You've most likely received approval on your dissertation at this point. So you need to incorporate your statistical findings and then discuss how the findings relate to previous literature, and also discuss limitations and recommendations for future studies. And I also should have mentioned that the proposal chapters need to be shifted to past tense. Once you're doing the final defense, the methodology is done, so you need to shift everything to past tense. All right, so in terms of preparation, I would suggest asking your school for a template for the PowerPoints. See if they have a particular format, different section headings. Are you allowed to use figures and pictures? The most important thing, I think, is knowing the minimum or maximum slide count. Every university tends to have a guideline for what to aim for in terms of slide numbers. In my experience, between 20 and 30 slides is usually the sweet spot. You can also request for approved examples from your committee that they have been a committee on, or a chair on, or a methodologist on. See if they have approved examples that they can send to you. That way you can see the appropriate format. And then you can also ask your committee what types of questions to anticipate. So ahead of time, send your PowerPoint to your committee before your defense and ask them, are there any questions I can anticipate? Are these questions going to happen during the defense or at the end? Obviously, it would be preferable for it to be at the end, so you're not tripped up with a random question in the middle. Okay, so if you're presenting remotely, which is very common these days, using Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Google Meet, this gives you a great advantage in that you can use multiple monitors. You can print out your entire dissertation. You can highlight key sections of the paper that you want to discuss. And you can have a list of specific talking points for your defense. But you will want to test out the logistics of the software prior to your defense so you don't have any hiccups during the actual presentation. I say use 2 monitors because you can have your dissertation on one screen and notes, and you can have your PowerPoint on a second screen. If you're presenting in person, still that is done at many universities. It's a little more rare these days, but you'll have to familiarize yourself with the equipment, a projector, USB cable, HDMI cables, and whatever presentation software you happen to be using, if that's PowerPoint or something else. Make sure that you know how to use all of the equipment. So on this slide, this is the general template I see for a PowerPoint. And let me just exit out of the presentation view. So this part here that I'm highlighting is for the proposal defense, from the problem statement down to the data analysis process. That's kind of like the data analysis plan and your methodology. How are you going to address your research questions statistically? So this part right here is the proposal defense. And then the final defense includes these last 2 bullet points, the research results, and what are the implications of these findings. Okay, what do you present on the methodology slide? So the most important thing is presenting your research questions and hypotheses. That kind of lays the foundation for your entire paper. Then the methodology is about justifying decisions that you're making. So you need to have definitions ready for any statistical terms or methodological terms that you're using. So if you're using a quantitative correlational design, you need to explain why you selected quantitative versus qualitative. And then you need to identify why you selected a correlational design versus an experimental design or a descriptive design or a predictive design. So have definitions ready. Then you need to define your population and the sample. And within the sampling section, you can discuss any inclusion or exclusion criteria, what will allow people to qualify for your study and what would disqualify people. And then you need to provide a sample size estimate. And usually this is done with GPower. So that is a free statistical software, GPower. And using the software, you can generate the minimum sample size target for your research. That is important to mention during the presentation. Then you need to describe your data collection procedures. That's a fairly big bullet point. You know, you have to describe from step A to step Z. How are you going to collect your data? Are you administering consent forms? What permissions do you need to access your instrumentation? What is the format of your survey? Do you have a demographic survey and then perhaps a Likert scale survey? And then is there any follow-up with participants after the survey has been completed? Then you can describe the actual instrumentation. You know, does it follow a Likert scale, as I mentioned before? What are the scoring instructions? Is the variable continuous, ordinal, or nominal? And the same applies to archival data. So archival data is secondary data that already exists. So you should pinpoint where are you gathering that data from? What permissions did you need? Is it publicly accessible, or do you need permission to access it? Then you can describe your data analysis procedures. Okay, so what software are you going to use to crunch your numbers? And what assumptions are you going to check prior to running your statistical analyses? Are you going to check for normality, homoscedasticity, linearity, things like those? Okay. And then in terms of the results slide, so assuming we're at the final defense now, if you reported on demographics such as gender, age, ethnicity, you can just copy and paste your entire table into the presentation. I think visual aids are often better than just having a ton of text and bullet points. So just copy and paste tables if that's possible, and then describe the numbers and how they align with the greater population. Then you can present descriptive statistics for the variables of interest. So this includes giving the sample size, means, standard deviations, potentially a Cronbach alpha measurement for reliability. Then briefly, being the key word here, briefly review these statistical assumptions. Okay, so in the dissertation, this might be a fairly big section, especially at GCU. There's a huge section about checking assumptions in the paper itself, but during the defense, you don't necessarily need to spend a ton of time on discussing assumptions. Just 2 or 3 bullet points. I checked for normality. These were the results. I had a few outliers. This is what I did with those outliers. Then you want to present the findings for each hypothesis. So I would recommend 1 to 2 slides per hypothesis or per research question. Summarize the key takeaways of your research question analysis. So what are the test statistics? What are the mean scores by group? What are the beta values if you're using regression models? And then discuss the p-values. So the p-values, that's going to tell you if you have a significant relationship or a significant difference or not. And then you need to conclude with a definitive statement for whether your hypothesis is supported or not supported. Okay, so let's look at a few examples here. I have a proposal defense and I have a final defense. So this proposal defense is from GCU. GCU has a template to follow. I'll go through the introductory slides rather quickly, and then we'll focus on the methodology. So you start out with your introduction and your background and gap in the literature. Then you go into your theoretical and conceptual framework. Often, if you're doing just a quantitative study, you might only have a theoretical framework and not a conceptual framework. Conceptual is more for qualitative studies. Here is a model of the frameworks. Then we have the problem statement. And you can see this individual included talking points at the bottom of the slide, so that can be useful as well. Then we go into the purpose statement. This is all chapter 1 information. Your research question and the hypotheses. Then we go into the research method. Okay, so here is where you identify what method you're using, quantitative or qualitative, and justify that decision. Okay, so it allows you to use numerical data. What is the specific design underneath the quantitative method? In this case, it was quasi-experimental. This person included a definition of quasi-experimental. Okay, and then this is also something I would recommend is building a variable table. So you can have a column with all your variables of interest. You can identify if it's an independent or dependent variable. What is the variable being measured by? A particular instrument or archival data. And then what is the measurement level of each variable? Is it categorical or nominal, or interval or continuous, or potentially ordinal? And then you could even include a final column here to say possible values. So you could say, testing time refers to pre-test and post-test. And then for the engagement, perseverance, for example, You could say the scores range from 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 or whatever the Likert scale is. Okay, then you go into population and sampling. So here's where you define your overarching population. You give a sample size estimate. So this was based on the power analysis from G-Power. Then you continue talking about the sampling. This is a little bit about recruitment. So what is the sampling procedure you're going to use? Convenience sampling, random sampling, snowball sampling. You can discuss recruitment and ethical considerations. Then you go into instrumentation. So this person had a demographic questionnaire, and then they had a Likert scale based survey ranging from 1 to 5. And this is important to note that you're not always creating the survey on your own. It may be a previously validated instrument that's valid and reliable. Okay, and then this slide discusses each variable of interest and how many items correspond to that specific variable. So there are 4 items that connect to each construct. Then you go into data collection procedures. Okay, so this is one way to present it. I don't really prefer a method like this. I think it's a little busy, for a PowerPoint. There's a lot to read. There's a lot of little text. I would probably just do bullet points for something like this, but this is an option, a data collection flowchart. Then we go into data analysis procedures. Okay, so this is where you discuss, first I would mention what software you're planning to use, if that's SPSS or Stata or R, and then discuss the cleaning of the data. What are you doing with non-responses and missing data? And then what descriptive statistics are you going to use? Are you checking for reliability? So this is where you really dive in. So frequencies will be used for demographics, and then means and standard deviations for continuous variables. And then discussing Cronbach alpha at the bottom here. That's a measure of reliability. Then this is the testing of assumptions. Okay, so this is where I said you want to be brief about the assumption discussion, and this person really went into depth about it. I don't think that's advisable because your committee could have a lot of questions about this. It's already in the paper. That's the thing. It's already in the dissertation, so you don't want to harp on the assumption testing too much. You want to focus on the analysis. So this person went through each assumption one by one and discussed what needs to be verified, what makes the assumption supported or not supported. Okay, and then this is where they get into the primary analysis. So this person is using a MANOVA, a multivariate analysis of variance. So discussing the MANOVA and hypothetical interpretations, and then ending with references and questions at the end. Right, so that is a proposal defense example. And note how it ends at the data analysis plan. That's kind of the last part. For a final defense, I have an example here. This is a different school, but it's very similar. You can see it follows the general template, but we're adding these last 2 bullets. We're incorporating the results, the implications, and the conclusion. Okay, so again, problem statement, purpose statement, theory, and then you go into research method. So the population is discussed, the sample is discussed. Again, a power analysis was conducted to figure out the sample size requirement. The research questions are presented along with the hypotheses. Then this is the data collection plan for this person. You can see how it's a bullet point list. I think this reads better than the flow chart and the other example. Okay, so things to talk about here are recruitment, consent, gaining permissions to use surveys. How long is the survey going to take? What are you using to collect the data? SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, or maybe Amazon mTurk? And then what are you planning to do with the data once the survey is closed? Then the data analysis process, very similar to the other participant. Okay, and then here are the research results. So this is what I was saying about just copying and pasting your entire demographics in, and then you can just discuss any noteworthy findings in the demographics. Also give a definitive count of your sample size. Here are descriptives for the variables of interest. We have 3 commitment variables in toxic leadership. So we have our sample size, the minimum score, the maximum score, the mean or the average, and the standard deviation. And then this is a check for normality. And then here are the research results. Okay, so this person provided the results of the correlations. They gave the p-values to identify, is there a significant relationship or not? And then they conclude with a definitive statement right here. The null hypothesis for research question 1 was partially rejected. Okay, so you want to conclude with that statement. Do we reject or do we fail to reject the null hypothesis? And then the PowerPoint will go into implications of the findings. And also, I would often see limitations in this section. So what were the limitations? Maybe the sample size was small for your study. Maybe the survey instrument you're using hasn't been validated before. And then you can also discuss recommendations for future studies. Right, and then there's a conclusion and a question and answer session. Pretty much it. So proposal and final defense, they're very similar. You're just adding some additional content for the final defense. Right, do we have any questions? If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box or the Q&A box. And if you have any questions about the services we provide, you can give us a call at 727-442-4290, or you can email us at info@statisticsolutions.com. And my colleague Brittany has put some hyperlinks in the chat box as well for scheduling consultations and checking out the free resources on our company website. Do we have any questions about the defense? Or any general methodological questions? Any questions? All right. Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll send everyone a copy of the PowerPoint and the webinar. And yes, I just saw a question from Venus. Yes, we will send a copy of the PowerPoint and the webinar to your email. Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone. Let us know if you have any questions. And we do about 10 of these webinars a month covering a variety of topics. So come join us again. Have a great day.